I used to believe I was unbreakable. I thought rejection was my right. I believed love would always wait for me. Then one rainy night, everything stopped. My name is Mr. Brooke, and before the accident, I lived as if consequences were things that happened to other people. At 25, I was healthy, confident, and painfully selective. My parents would introduce me to remarkable women, intelligent, kind, grounded, but I always found a reason to say no. One was too simple, another was not my type. I told myself I was waiting for something extraordinary, someone flawless, someone who would complete the polished image I had of my future. I worked in commercial real estate, closed competitive deals, and ran 5 miles every morning before sunrise. Discipline was my religion. Fitness was my identity. I admired my reflection not out of vanity, I told myself, but out of pride and hard work. Looking back, I see something else: fear. Fear of settling, fear of vulnerability, fear of choosing someone real instead of someone ideal. Then came the night that split my life in two. Rain poured so hard the highway looked like liquid glass. A truck ahead of me lost control. I remember the violent spin, the crushing impact, and then silence. When I woke up in the hospital, I couldn't move my legs. The doctors spoke gently about spinal cord trauma, about swelling, about uncertainty. I waited for them to say it was temporary. They never did. Days turned into weeks. I learned words I never thought would belong to me: paralysis, rehabilitation, assistive devices. Friends visited with sympathy in their eyes, but I could already see distance forming. Conversations changed. Invitations slowed. Dating apps went silent when my photos changed. I began to understand something brutal. The world treats strength like currency, and I had just declared bankruptcy. Late at night, staring at the ceiling, I replayed every woman I had dismissed, every kind smile I had taken for granted. I had believed I was choosing from abundance. Now I felt erased by absence. For the first time in my life, I wasn't ahead. I wasn't admired. I wasn't desired. I was simply a man in a hospital bed, forced to confront the fragile foundation I had built my identity upon. And beneath the anger and humiliation, a question began to whisper: if I was no longer the man who could run, who exactly was I? Rehabilitation did not feel heroic. It felt humiliating. It felt slow. It felt like learning how to exist all over again. The first time I tried to sit upright without support, my body trembled like it belonged to someone else. Muscles I had once trained with pride refused simple commands. The therapists called it adjustment. I called it betrayal. Every morning began with measurements: blood pressure, mobility range, tolerance levels, while I silently measured something else: how far I had fallen from the man I used to be. I used to measure success in miles and money. Now success meant transferring from bed to wheelchair without assistance. Independence shrank into small, stubborn victories. I hated how people spoke to me more softly, as if volume could bruise me. I hated the way strangers avoided eye contact in public, unsure whether to stare or pretend not to see me. But what I hated most was my own reflection, because it forced me to confront the truth that my confidence had been conditional. It had depended on movement, admiration, control. Without those, I felt hollow. My therapist once asked, "What if this isn't the end of your strength, but the beginning of a different kind?" I dismissed it at first. It sounded like something printed on a motivational poster. But the question stayed with me. In rehab, I met people whose losses were heavier than mine, yet whose spirits seemed lighter. A former firefighter paralyzed from the chest down who still joked about racing us in wheelchairs. A young mother relearning how to grip a spoon so she could feed her child. They weren't waiting to be rescued. They were rebuilding. Slowly, something shifted in me. I began journaling, not to complain, but to process. I wrote about anger, envy, shame. I wrote about how I used to evaluate women like resumes, scanning for surface qualities, ignoring depth. I realized I had been searching for perfection because I feared being seen imperfectly myself. Now imperfection was unavoidable, and strangely, that made me more honest. I started posting short reflections online about rehab, about ego, about learning patience. I didn't expect anyone to care, but messages began arriving from veterans, accident survivors, people battling depression. They said my words made them feel understood. For the first time, people were responding not to my appearance or status, but to my vulnerability. That realization shook me more than the crash ever had. Maybe my value had never been in my legs. Maybe it had been buried under pride. The more I shared, the more I understood that strength wasn't dominance, it was endurance. It wasn't about being admired, it was about being authentic. And for the first time since the accident, I felt something unfamiliar but powerful rising inside me. Not denial, not anger, something steadier, something that felt like purpose. Strength does not roar. It whispers. It survives in quiet moments. It grows in patience, not perfection. It appears where no one expects it. By the time I left rehab, I was no longer the man who measured worth in miles or admiration. I was Mr. Brooke, but a different version. Someone who had stared at limitation and learned to walk through life differently. Speaking engagements began almost by accident. A local support group asked me to share my story. I hesitated. Who wanted to hear a man recount his failures? But the first time I wheeled onto that small stage, I realized people didn't come to pity me, they came to recognize themselves in my journey. I spoke about arrogance, about rejection, about the illusion of control. I shared how I had once dismissed women for superficial reasons, how I had valued speed over substance, and how an accident had forced me to confront what mattered. People nodded. Some laughed at awkward moments, some cried. And I saw, for the first time, that honesty was magnetic. That vulnerability, not perfection, drew connection. Over the next months, invitations multiplied. Universities, corporate wellness seminars, nonprofits. Each audience reminded me that what I thought were my weaknesses were actually bridges. People with disabilities, people fighting personal battles, people questioning their worth, they leaned in, not out. I strengthened my upper body, learned to transfer independently, and even mastered brief standing with braces. Though my wheelchair remained my primary companion, physical transformation was modest, but emotional growth was vast. I began dating, not seeking someone flawless, but someone who saw me fully. One evening after a talk, a woman approached and said simply, "You speak like someone who has finally met himself." That statement hit me harder than any compliment I had received in youth. Love, I realized, did not depend on legs, status, or image. It depended on authenticity. My parents watched, quietly proud, as I navigated life not with the arrogance of my 20s, but with the resilience of my new self. In meeting adversity head-on, I discovered that life's value is not in speed or selective choices, but in courage, humility, and connection. I cannot run as I once did, but I can move hearts, shift perspectives, and inspire resilience in ways I never imagined. If you have met 25-year-old me, you would have seen a man chasing the illusion of perfection. Meet me now, and you see a man who understands that real strength whispers, it survives in patience, thrives in vulnerability, and carries you forward when the world expects you to stop.